Every desert carries a wound hidden under its skin. Some are buried, some are forgotten, and some wait. Ash Gulch was one of those places, an old settlement so far gone that even the wind seemed afraid to pass through it. The sun was retreating from the sky the way frightened things retreat from fire, quickly and without looking back. Along a broken trail of dust and cracked earth came Rango, sheriff of somewhere small, a creature held together more by nerve than courage. A drifter in a red Hawaiian shirt, riding a battered old armadillo named Burl, whose armor plates were chipped with age and whose one cloudy I had seen too much to care anymore. Ahead of them, across the dying desert light, Ash Gulch rose from the horizon. Crooked buildings, a dead well, a leaning church steeple painted white long ago, and hanging from that steeple, a bell, moving, though the air was perfectly still. The iron sign at the entrance to town swung gently on rusted chains. Ash Gulch. Population. Listening. The main street was empty. Not the ordinary kind of empty. Not the harmless kind. This was the kind of silence that feels occupied. The kind that makes the back of your neck tighten because something unseen is already measuring your breathing. Rango stepped onto the warped wooden planks of the street and heard his footsteps twice. Once beneath him, and once behind him. In the dusty window of the barber shop, he caught his reflection. The reflection looked back. Then it blinked. Rango did not. Near the shop entrance, half buried in sand, lay a single child's shoe. Small, clean, new enough to feel wrong. Then, all at once, the curtains in every window along the street shifted. No wind, no movement, no sound. Just the feeling that the whole town had opened its eyes. The church door stood open. The wood had dried black with age, and the hinges gave no sound when Rango stepped inside. The pews were still lined in perfect rows, as if the congregation had only just risen and gone. But on every bench lay a thin layer of dust pressed into the shape of kneeling bodies. At the front of the church, behind the altar, old portraits hung on the wall. Foxes, lizards, mice, jackrabbits, and in every portrait, their mouths had been sewn shut with black thread. An old hymn book rested open on the pulpit. Rango stepped closer. There were no songs inside. No verses. No prayers. Page after page contained only names. Names written over names. Lines of them. Generations of them. And on the very last page, in fresh dark ink, was one final name. Rango. At that exact moment, the bell above the steeple rang once. Low. Hollow. And the whole church seemed to swallow the sound before it could die. There was a narrow trapdoor beneath the altar. Rango opened it and descended into a cold that had no business existing under desert earth. The stone steps were damp. The walls were lined with hundreds, no thousands, of tiny brass bells. None of them moved, and yet each of them whispered. One carried the voice of a crying child. Another, the trembling prayer of an old woman. Another, a voice that only breathed. Another, a half-finished sentence that never found its ending. Below the stairs, the church opened into catacombs. Narrow passages, low ceilings, ropes hanging from above, old bell ropes darkened with age and moisture. The farther Rango walked, the clearer the whispers became, until at last the corridor opened into a hidden chamber. At its center stood a black wooden pulpit, and hanging behind it from the darkness above was a great bell rope. Wet, freshly wet, as if someone had been holding it only moments before. The first thing to arrive was not a body. It was a voice. Amen. Then it stepped out of the dark. Tall, far too tall. A black coyote in the rotting remains of a preacher's coat. Its face was narrow and bony, stretched with age and hunger. But its mouth was the worst part. It split too far down the jaw, hanging open in a shape no living thing should survive. And inside, there was no tongue, no throat, no flesh. Its chest was hollow. Inside that emptiness hung dozens of tiny bells. They chimed softly with every movement. And when it spoke, the voice did not come from its mouth. Came from inside its chest. In layers. 10 voices. 100 voices. Dead voices. Give me your name, it said. and I will spare you the silence." Along the walls, shapes began to rise from the stone. The congregation, the town's dead, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide open, faces pale and waiting, all of them staring at Rango, all of them waiting for him to speak. Rango had no gun worth trusting, and courage had never been the most reliable thing about him. But he still had one talent that fear had not taken. He could lie. The hollow preacher moved closer, the bells in its chest giving off that sick little music. "Speak your true name," it said. Every soul that passed through here did the same. Rango swallowed hard. The congregation drew tighter around him. Behind him, the great bell rope began to sway. And then, looking straight into those dead white eyes, Rango said, "My name is El Venganza de la Noche, Sultan of Dust, Defender of Seven Graves." For one long second, nothing moved. Then every bell inside the creature's chest erupted at once. Shrieking, rattling, violently wrong. The lie would not fit inside it. For the first time, the hollow preacher recoiled. His coat split open, and the darkness inside began to tear. But the preacher was not the true hunger. It was only the servant. The bells spilled from its broken chest and struck the stone floor, and from each one escaped a trapped voice. Asobi. Prayer. A laugh that ended in panic. A final breath. And among them, Rango heard something that turned his blood cold. His own voice, perfectly his, perfectly terrified. It was coming from above, from the great bell in the steeple. That was when he understood. The town did not take your life first. Took your voice, your truth, your name. Then the bell above rang with such force that the stone chamber split wide open. The pulpit cracked down the middle. The floor beneath it gave way. And below the church was not darkness, not a tunnel, not a pit, a mouth, Faust, ancient, waiting. The whole town of Ash Gulch had not been built around a church. It had been built around feeding that thing. Rango ran. The stairs were collapsing beneath him. Inside the church above, the portraits tore free from the walls, and from behind their sewn mouths poured black smoke instead of blood. The bell tower screamed over the town. Rango kicked through the trapdoor, stumbled out into the freezing pre-dawn air, and nearly fell onto the empty street. Earl was waiting, still, silent, as if he had already decided there was nothing sacred left in this town worth staying for. Rango climbed onto his back, and together they fled into the graying desert. Behind them, Ash Gulch was waking. No lights came on in the windows. Instead, the darkness inside them only deepened. And with every violent ring of the church bell, Rango heard his own voice calling after him. Rango! 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 It was his voice, but he no longer remembered the moment it had been stolen. Rango never spoke the name Ash Gulch again. But there are some things that do not need to be named in order to follow. Back in Mud, he went through the motions of life. He smiled when he had to. He lied when it was useful. And he stopped sleeping any longer than necessary, because things came closer when he slept. The first strange thing was his shadow. Sometimes it moved a second too late. The second was the town well. Whenever he passed too near it, he could hear a bell ringing somewhere impossibly far below. But the third thing was the worst. Sometimes, when he was alone, he heard his own voice speaking to him. Not from his mouth, from underneath the floorboards. Softly, patiently, almost kindly. One night he knelt down and pressed his face close to the cracks in the wood. There was nothing there, only darkness. Then his own voice rose from below once more, closer this time. "Just say your true name once." Rango froze, and beneath the floorboards, something rang, a very small bell.